Hi everyone. It's December 2016. It's time to look over the past year, see what went well, what didn't go well, for you. Review that in the past. Let go of that which wasn't good for you. Cling to that which was. Incorporate it all into yourself, and then move on into the into the new year in January. So part of that process is reviewing. For me, is reviewing, what I read throughout the year, and so I recently did a video on my 2016 nonfiction reads. So now I want to do a quick rundown of my literary fiction reads. So there were 9 titles that I classify as literary fiction, and I just want to run through them, relatively quickly. I actually did video chats on each of these works as I finished them throughout 2016. So there are video chats available, which I will put the links to in the details. That if you're interested in hearing a bit more about any of these works, you can check that out. Because I do go into more depth and obviously in the individual chats. So let's get to it. All right. So in March. I read, March 2016, I read the book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa. I've mentioned this in a number of other videos. It's probably, it's one of those books that you read in your life that just hit you, that become part of you, that you want to keep with you forever. This is one of those books. So glad I finally discovered Fernando Pessoa, and I do have a book of his poetry on my TBR for 2017. So stay tuned for that. The next book I read, which was in March, is Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. So, I love Murakami's work. I've read several of his other works as well. This story is a couple of it's 2 different really major journeys going on. Kafka's a young boy who is trying to escape an Oedipal complex he feels, and then Mr. Nagata is sort of a mentally different person who can talk to cats, and the cats also can talk. So how can you go wrong with talking cats? And so I loved it. It was a great journey to go on with those characters, and I just never seemed to go wrong with Murakami. So the next book in May, literary fiction, is Stoner by John Williams. This turned out to be extremely good. It was first published in 1965, and then shockingly it didn't sell well and went out of print for quite a number of years, and was finally revived in the early 21st century. And I think it's been in print ever since then, thankfully, because now it's come to me to read, and I got to experience it. So this is a quiet tale of, an ordinary, the heroism of an ordinary man. It's just beautiful. It's just beautifully done, and I loved reading it. And I'm really glad that I picked it up and read it. When I read the description of it, it's not something that just it sort of sounded sort of mundane, but then when I actually read it, it was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. Now, Steppenwolf, I read in June. This is by Hermann Hesse. This was originally published in 1927, so we got kind of an odd cover for this edition. This translated edition is from 1963 that I read. So this was great. It's sort of a middle-aged man who is disillusioned with himself, with humanity actually, and goes on a journey of self-awareness, and ultimately has experiences a change of consciousness, helped along by a couple of characters as well as the spirit of Mozart. I got a lot from this book. I do have a Siddhartha from Hermann Hesse on my TBR for 2017, so stay tuned for that. The next work which I read in August is Colorless Colorless, Tsukuru, Tazaki, and His Years of Pilgrimage. This is also Haruki Murakami. So I read 2 Murakami works this year. This is a 30-something man who goes, has something happen to him in his earlier life, and is sort of haunted by that and needs to go on, try to figure out what has happened to him in his past. I feel like this is a journey that all humans go on in one form or another in their lives, to figure out what their past means and what happened to them, just to determine what happened. So I loved that. I loved it. I never seem to go wrong, as I said, with Murakami. That book had sort of gotten mixed reviews, so I wasn't sure, but it turned out to be great to me. So then the next work I read in September, this is The Guild of St. Cooper by Shia Scanlon. So this is really cool. This really turned out to be a really cool work as well. I wasn't sure what to expect going into it because it sounded a little, if you read the blurb for it, it's sort of described as a dystopia, but it's not exactly like a classic. I wouldn't say like a classic dystopia. It turned out to be really good timing with me because as I was reading this book, I saw a video about the film work of David Lynch that was on YouTube, and I talk about this in the video chat if you're interested in going more in depth. But the two, reading this book along and in tandem with learning about the film works of David Lynch, I just enjoyed it so much. This is on a future reread list because I definitely want to revisit this work again in the future. So it will probably be read in my December reread month of 2017. And then in September also I read The Garden of Evening Mist by Tuan Eng. This takes place in Malaysia. This is a story about a woman's experience. She's an older, in retirement, she's got a neurodegenerative disease, but as she's aware of that and she retires, she's remembering her past. And her past is she was in a Japanese internment camp where she was the only survivor, actually. And then she, after the war, apprenticed to a Japanese gardener who was building a Japanese garden in Malaysia. And this sort of tells the story of their redemptive relationship that they developed with each other, as well as her sort of coming to terms with her past. So it was very beautiful in places, and I definitely enjoyed reading that as well. So then in November I read something a little different from me. This is Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This novel tells the story of, it takes place during the events of the Iliad, and it focuses on the relationship of Patroclus and Achilles. They were obviously they were beloved. They had a relationship with each other. They loved each other, and this sort of explores that from when they were young boys, when they first met, all the way through their education by a centaur, which was cool, and then they ultimately, of course, they go off to the Trojan War. But it was really beautifully done. I really enjoyed it. I really got a lot from it. I really experienced the Trojan War and the Iliad a little differently through their eyes in this perspective. So was not disappointed in that at all. I wish I could say the same thing for the next book, which was the Penelope Ad, published in 2005 by Margaret Atwood. I did not connect with this work that well. This takes place during the events of the Odyssey, but it's told from the perspective of Penelope. I did not love Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale either. So, there, I said it. Most people really love that. And so I don't know if it's maybe her writing style that I have difficulty engaging with, but it wasn't bad. It was sort of entertaining. It was a little, I think, superficial from what I was expecting, as compared especially to having just read The Song of Achilles, which felt like was more deep and more in depth. But it's part of it's sort of satirical, part of it's kind of like told in a funny way, even though some of it's not. Some of the actions in the book obviously aren't that funny. For example, when the 12 maidens get hung, but I was a little disappointed in it just because I felt like it was a little it was a little more superficial than I was hoping for, but it was a good read, and I'm really glad I read it and paired it with the Song of Achilles, sort of looking at the Iliad and Odyssey through these fictional works with a little different perspective. So that was worth it in that sense. So those are my 9 works that I view as literary fiction that I read in 2016. I just want to close with a quick quote from the Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa, which I find myself finding a relevant quote for almost anything in. But he says, in the vast colony of our being, there are many species of people who think and feel in different ways. And I feel like there are multiple aspects to myself, and they all engage in the different characters that are in books in different ways. And so I feel like, that's sort of a cool kind of quote relating to reading and how different people experience books in different ways, because we're all multiple people within ourselves. And if I read these works next year or read these works again, I may experience them completely different than I do today. So that's kind of the cool part about reading. So I'll close with that. I will have a video coming up with my science fiction fantasy, which was my other most read fiction genre of 2016. So stay tuned for that. Take care. Bye.